Hi guys, bit of a different topic today. Instead of the usual languages, Irish, biology, we are going to go back. Do you remember this? We're going to revisit the periodic table. Have it here printed out on paper and with different colors for the various sections. But what we're going to do today is look at some of the stories behind the elements, or moreover, their names. So if you've ever wondered, like me, why silver isn't something like Si or Sr, Sl, but is in fact Ag, gold is Au, tungsten is W, you might say, what's the connection? Why do these elements have these seemingly completely random letters? So we're going to find out why. Now I'm going to go through, we're not going to talk about every single element, of course, because it will be too long. I'm sure a lot of them have rather tedious stories, perhaps. And we're just going to focus on the elements that have very different symbols compared to their names in English, and some other elements that have interesting stories behind them, whether it's related to their name or how they were discovered. Okay, so but before we start going through the elements, we'll just have a quick rundown on the history of the periodic table. We didn't always have a periodic table, you know, we're quite lucky these days to have it all laid out so easily, because in as recently as 1817, it's 200 years ago this year, this is when the earliest attempt to classify the elements began, and a man named Johann Wolfgang Dobereiner, I hope I said his name correctly, was the first one to start trying to do this. And then, a couple of years later, in 1829, he realized he was able to group certain elements together in groups of 3, which he called triads. For example, chlorine, bromine, iodine, calcium, strontium, barium, or barium, sulfur, selenium, or selenium, some people say selenium, I say selenium, and tellurium, lithium, sodium, and potassium. So he had these groups of 3, and they all had similar properties. Next, then in 1862, the man who devised an early form of the periodic table was a Frenchman named Alexandre Émile Beguier de Champ-Courtois. I think they all have complicated names, these scientists, and he was a French geologist. And he noticed the periodicity of the elements, so that like every certain amount of elements would have repeating characteristics. Another person who was very interested in the periodicity of elements was Newlands, John Newlands. He was an English chemist, and in 1864 he classified 62 elements, because that was all that was known in those days, the 62 elements into 8 groups based on their physical properties. However, he was not really taken very seriously when one of his texts was published in Chemistry News, in which he likened the periodicity of the elements to 8ths on the musical scale. He was just laughed at and ridiculed, which is a little bit crazy now, knowing as we do that he was really onto something, and his work was not respected until decades later. But he did contribute the word periodic to the periodic table. Then finally, the man who really put it all together was Dmitri Ivanovich Mendeleev, and he was the first scientist to make a periodic table like the one used today. He had it so well organized that he even had spaces left for elements which were at the time undiscovered but he knew that they would be discovered because it was, he knew the properties of the element that was going to be discovered just because he had organized everything very well into the right groups and numbers of protons and neutrons and things like that. Okay, and about the names, you will notice that many of the names end in the letters This was started by the Romans, and it was continued by Victorian scientists. Okay, so let's start going through. I'm going to use point with this pencil to where we are, because I think it's all a bit small. So, number one, we're going to look at number one. Number one is helium. And helium is named after the place where it was found because it is the only element that wasn't first discovered on Earth, because it's in the sun, and therefore it was named after Helios, or maybe Helios, the Greek word for sun, helium, because it was found in the sun. Then next, let's, as I said, we're not going to go through them all, but we'll move on to lithium. Lithium, one of the alkaline metals. Lithium is actually the least dense metal, and it takes its name from another Greek word, lithos, stone. And this is because it was discovered originally in a stone, as opposed to the other metals, sodium and potassium, the other alkaline metals, sodium and potassium, that were discovered in plants and animals. So lithium comes from stone. The name comes from stone. Next, then moving on to number 6. Where's number 6? Number 6 here. Number 6 is carbon. A very, very, very common element here on Earth. And this takes its name from the word carbo, which is a Latin word meaning coal or charcoal. Then number 10, over here in the corner, is neon. Neon gets its name from another Greek word, neos, or neos, I suppose it's pronounced neos, and it's from the Greek word for new, because it was newly discovered in the year 1898. Not very new now, but it was back then. Then we have number 13, which is aluminium, or for the Americans among you, aluminum. And aluminium was named after alum. It was first discovered in alum, so it was named after aluminium. Aluminium was named after alum, is what I want to say. Then 15 here is phosphorus. Phosphorus is interesting because phosphorus means light bearer or light bringing, which makes sense when you think about other words with that kind of root, like the phosphorescent algae or creature, plankton, phosphorescent plankton in the sea, a phosphorescent glow. And it was called this because the first compound of the element glowed in the dark. So people thought of it as a glowy element. And in fact, in the 1500s and 1600s, phosphorus was another name for the planet Venus. Even though it's not now, but it was in the past. Next, moving on to number 23, which is here, 23, the symbol V, vanadium. Vanadium is one of the transition metals in this group here. So apparently when it's oxidized, it produces a variation of beautiful colors. This is the reason why the scientist who was working on these solutions, Niels Sefstrom decided to name vanadium after Vanadis, which was an alternative name for the Norse goddess Freya, the goddess of beauty. Which I suppose again makes sense because it sounds like connected with vanity, vain, that kind of thing. That's easy to remember. Vanadium. Then we have 24, just beside vanadium, chromium. This one again is also colorful. Well, it produces colorful compounds, so it comes from the Greek word chroma, which means color. Chromium. So vanadium and chromium, there they are, colorful beside each other. Then 19, of course, here, over here, the alkali metals is potassium. I always wondered, why is potassium K? It doesn't make any sense. Well, potassium is, the name potassium is derived from the word potash, because potassium can be achieved from burning vegetable matter and I think leaching out the substance from the ash. So potash, which is what they used to do when they were making soap, like Castile, what we call Castile soap, basic soap, which is just a mixture of lye and fat, for example, olive oil. But anyway, the K comes from calum, which was the Latin name for potash, the medieval Latin name for potash. So there you go. Potassium comes from potash. Potash means calum in Latin, and so that's why we have the K. Next, iron. Iron, again, is another one that does not have the same symbols as the English word. It has Fe. If I can find it, there it is. Fe, iron. And this comes from ferrum, which is Latin again. And we still, I suppose that one is easy to remember as well, especially if you know any other European languages. We still have it in English, like things based on Fe, ferrous, connected to iron. Next, we have cobalt. Cobalt has a little bit of a funny story. It's a little bit weird. It's number 27. Here it is, CO. And it is often found naturally alongside minerals that contain arsenic. So it's not as dangerous itself like arsenic, but it just usually hangs out with arsenic. Now when it's smelting is like a process of heating and melting to extract element from its mineral ore. When you're smelting, cobalt ore can emit noxious arsenic fumes, which is obviously not good. And before people could explain all of these bad effects with scientific knowledge, they believed that there were evil creatures in the cobalt ore, called kobolds. Well, they didn't know it was cobalt, but they called the goblins who were supposedly causing all of these troublesome effects, supernatural things, they called them kobolds with a D. And so cobalt gets its name from the kobolds, the supposed evil goblins who were causing all of these issues when smelting. Next we have copper, which is 29. And copper is Cu. On Cyprus, many years ago, there was a lot of production of copper. And the ancient Greek word for Cyprus was Kyprios. And so cuprum has descended etymologically from Kyprios. And cuprum is the Latin name for copper. So there we have it. Cyprus used to be called Kyprios, gave its name to cuprum, which is the Latin name for copper, which is why it is Cu. Next up we have gallium. Gallium is an interesting one, 31, because it involves a bit of scandal. And it is a brittle, silvery coloured metal with a melting point just above room temperature at 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's quite interesting, seeing as, if you held it in your hand, it would melt. Unless you have very, very cold hands, like I do, actually. And it was discovered in 1875 by the French chemist Paul-Émile Lecoq de Bois-Baudran. And he decided that he would name this element after the Latin name for France, which is Gaul, Gaul. But not long after he announced his discovery and the name of the new element, the newly found element, people got a little bit angry and accused him of naming it after himself. And this is because Lecoq is like the rooster in French. She translated to English, it's the rooster, and Gallus means rooster in Latin, and Gaul sounds very like Latin, Gallus, Gallium, Lecoq, the rooster. So yeah, there was a bit of a scandal about that, although he denied it, and he apparently explicitly wrote in a paper in 1877 that France was the true namesake. But the rumour followed him for the rest of his life, and apparently some people still say that he wanted to call it after himself again today. But I don't really see the problem with naming it after himself. I don't know why people would get so weird about that if he discovered it. Anyway, let's move on to 32, next door to gallium, which is germanium. Germanium. I hope I'm saying these correctly because I checked how to say them, but I think I've forgotten a couple of them. And this one is quite simple, quite obvious. It was named after Germany. And then next to 35, we have bromine. Bromine is interesting, another interesting one. Not really the story, just the element itself, because it's a kind of a reddish brownish liquid that looks like blood, and apparently it emits fumes and a nasty smell. It'd be interesting to smell it. I wonder what it smells like. I've never smelled bromine. If you have smelled bromine, let me know what it smells like. Maybe I haven't, I don't know. Anyway, it is one of the only two elements that are liquid at room temperature. The other one is, of course, mercury, which we will be getting onto. And so the smell actually gave the name to bromine because it comes from the Greek word bromos, which means stench. Interesting. Anyway, moving on beside here, we have Kr, which is krypton. Krypton, number 36. Now, krypton is colourless, odourless, but different from bromine, and it is difficult to discover. So, it was named after the Greek word for hidden, which is kryptos. Kryptos, krypton, which of course, the root of this word is in many different words in English, like the cryptological. 38 is strontium. Strontium. And this one is the only element named after a place in Britain, the only one. And it takes its name from the town of Strontium in the Scottish Highlands, because it was discovered there in 1790. Then moving on to yttrium, right beside strontium. And this is based on a place as well. The name is based on where it was discovered. A Swedish army officer who was also at the same time a part-time chemist, interesting combination, whose name was Arrhenius, found a rock which he had never seen before in a quarry near Ytterby in Sweden. Ytterby was just a small village, I think it still is. And so he called this new rock Ytterbite. But he also sent a sample to a friend Professor Johann Gadolin. And Gadolin actually found a completely new element in that sample. So it was decided to call it yttrium. But in fact, that wasn't the only one that was found in that area. They also found terbium, which is number 65, erbium, number 68, and ytterbium, 70. So this little town of Ytterby is the place that has given the most names to elements on the periodic table. It's quite impressive for a small village. Next we have 41, which is niobium. And this is interesting just because people couldn't agree on the name for 150 years. Because in America they were calling it columbium, while in Europe it was called niobium, but eventually it was decided that it would be niobium. And niobium was named after Niobe, which is a character from Greek mythology, and we will be running into her father later on, and I'll point him out to you. Then next we have ruthenium, 44. Ruthenium is named after the Latin name for Russia, which is Ruthenia. 47 is silver, and again, one of the ones that doesn't really match up with the English word, but it does if you speak French or Latin, because it comes from Latin, and it is an abbreviation for the word silver, argentum in Latin, which in turn actually comes from a Sanskrit word, argunas, which means shining. So now we know. And then tin, number 50, which is another one that doesn't match up at all with this symbol. This comes from Latin again, surprise, surprise. Stannum, the word stannum, Latin for tin. Number 51, SB, is antimony. And apparently it's not really known exactly where the name came from. There are three options. It could be derived from the word floret because of the compounds. They kind of end up being spiky like florets. It could be derived from the words, I suppose all of these words would be in Greek, so it would be the Greek for floret, or Greek meaning against solitude, because it's rare to find it on its own. Usually it's in compounds with other elements. Or it could be derived from Greek words meaning monk killer, because it is dangerous in its it's poisonous, and very many early alchemists were monks. So I'm sure probably a few of them were killed by antimony whilst they were doing their experiments. But we still don't know which of these three is the correct reason for the name. Moving on to 54, we have over here in the corner XE, xenon, which again is from a Greek word meaning strange or foreign, xenos, which you will have seen in other words such as xenophobia. 59 is praseodymium. 59. Oh, of course, it's down here. Praseodymium. And praseodymium comes from the word prasios or prasios, which is the Greek word for green, which actually takes its word from a leek, prason, the Greek word for leek. So, and this is all because its mineral salts have a greenish color. So there's the connection. Then we have 62. 62 here, of course, samarium. This was actually the first element to be named after a person. And it was named after a Russian mining engineer, Vasily Samarsky-Bikovets. And he gave some samples to a German mineralogist, Gustav Rose, samples that he had taken from a mine in the Ural Mountains. And within those samples, a mineral ore was discovered, which was called samarskite, after Samarsky. And then decades later, actually in 1879, guess who? De Bois-Bourdon, the guy who had the problem with the Gallus Lecoq, people saying that he named gallium after his own name. He was the one who found that the mineral ore, samarskite, contained an element that was new, so of course he named it after Samarsky. He named it samarium. So apparently nobody got angry when he gave the name of another person to an element. It was only when he named it after himself, well, that was supposedly named it after himself, that people got angry. A little bit of begrudging there, I think. Next we have Dysprosium 66 here. Dysprosium. And we're going back to our main character, the hero of today. Once again, de Bois-Bourdon discovered dysprosium in 1886, and it actually took him 30 different attempts to get a pure sample. And so that was why he called it after the Greek word hard to get at, dysprositos. 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 So dysprositos became dysprosium. Then number 67, HO, is called after Stockholm, the Latin name for Stockholm, Holmia. Number 71, very close by, Lu, is Lutetium, and it is named after the Latin name for Paris, Lutetia. Right beside that, well, in numbers, if not in places, 72 is called hafnium, and this is the Latin name for Copenhagen. Hafnia, named after Hafnia. '73 has an interesting story as well, because again it's linked to mythology. So remember that I mentioned Niobe, who gave her name to niobium. Well, her father was a character in Greek mythology who was called Tantalus, and he was punished by being made to stand in a pool of water, a knee-deep pool of water, with a fruit tree overhead, but whenever he reached out to either of those things, they would draw back from him. So, obviously very frustrating, especially if you're thirsty and hungry. His name, Tantalus, gave rise to tantalize, the origin of the word tantalize in English, which makes sense. And it was, this element, tantalum, was called after Tantalus because of the unreactiveness of the element. It appears like unaffected by almost anything that it comes in contact with or is submerged in. So next, moving on to tungsten, which, as I said at the beginning, was one which really confused me at first. Number 74, where's 74 here? W. So obviously the letter W isn't in the word tungsten at all. Tungsten comes from Swedish words tung, meaning heavy, and sten, meaning stone, so heavy stone. But the W comes from the German words Wolfram, which apparently was named after Spoomy Loopy, which I'm not sure, but I think it means like wolf spit or wolf foam. And it was named so because tungsten interfered in the process of smelting tin. So it was devouring the tin. So I guess they got this idea of some kind of weird wolf devouring the tin. Anyway, that is the W. Then we have gold, 79, which of course has a different symbol to the English word, and it comes from Latin again as well. Aurum, which means gold in Latin, which is very similar to other languages like Spanish or French. Oro, or sounds more similar, even if the letters aren't exactly the same. Mercury, number 80. Hg. So this comes from Greek, from a Greek word, hydrargyros, meaning water and silver, which makes sense because Mercury is, I suppose, has some of the liquid properties of water, but it also has the color more like silver. And Mercury itself was named after the Roman god. And the special thing about mercury is it's the only element that is liquid at standard pressure and temperature. As we saw before, I think bromine can melt at room temperature, so, or if you hold it in your hand, but mercury would just be liquid even if you don't touch it or even if you don't raise the temperature. Lead, 82, is Pb. And this comes from the Latin word plumbum, meaning liquid silver. So we have another reference to silver in a liquid form. 84 is polonium, and it is from the Latin name for Poland, Polonia. Uranium, number 92, down here, was discovered by a German chemist who named it after the planet Uranus, which at the time had been recently discovered. And then when the next elements, 93 and 94, you can see them here, Neptunium and Plutonium, they were given those names to continue this series of planet-named elements. Then in this line here we have a whole group of elements that are named after places or people. Starting here, I'm going to fold this down a bit. Starting here with Am, Americium. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it was named after America, number 95. Number 96 is Curium, named after Marie and Pierre Curie. 97, Berkelium, named after a place as well, like Berkeley, I guess. CF, 98, Californium, named after California. Then we have Einsteinium, named after Einstein. Fermium was named after Enrico Fermi. Mendeleevium, obviously named after Mendeleev, who we saw earlier, who designed the whole modern periodic table. And Nobelium, number 102, named after Alfred Nobel. And finally, just one more named after places. Well, one more named after a person, Bohrium, named after Niels Bohr, 107. And 110, Darmstadtium, named after Darmstadt, which is a city in the state of Hesse in Germany. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and maybe it'll give you a new way of looking at the periodic table. It is, of course, still very difficult to remember where they all go and the names of all the elements and how to pronounce them as well. And I'll see you next time around.